Before we jump into today's episode, quick disclaimer that this podcast isn't therapy. It's educational, not individualized advice. Everyone's brain and story are different, so if you're struggling, reach out to a licensed pro who can support you.
We talk about the stuff no one dares. ADHD, sex, and the science that cares. Real talk, raw truth, and the stories that heal. Welcome to ADHD Reality with Dr. B.
Welcome back to ADHD Realities. Today we have the great Dr. Gilly Kahn, and today we're going to be talking a lot about her upcoming book. But before we get started, I would love her to have the space to introduce herself to all of the listeners today. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you for having me on your show. So my name is Gilly, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And I'm also a mom of two beautiful little kids, and I am a writer too. I really love creative writing, and like Leanne just said, I have my book coming out soon. The title is Allow Me to Interrupt. A psychologist reveals the emotional truth behind women's ADHD. And my clinical work focuses on neurodiversity, especially like neurodiversity in teens. But I see people across the lifespan.
That's awesome. And I have to be honest, I'm a mom of three. So when I got my hands on your book as a means to prepare for our time together today, and I got the chance to read it before anyone else could, I actually really felt seen and validated in a way that I don't think I have ever been able to get from a book, because I know, like, even especially when we're talking about books that are written by psychologists or people in the field, it generally becomes very clinical toned. And for when I was reading it, I felt like I was talking to a friend. I felt like I was really being seen. And so the first thing that I really resonated with and really stood out was your title itself, because I know I'm the type of person that I've always interrupted growing up, and I've always been impulsive. And so my desire was like, where did that come from you? Like, what inspired that to be the title of this book?
Yeah, so I can definitely proudly say that I was the one who came up with the first part of the title, the Allow Me to Interrupt. Initially, actually, the title of the book was in the very like initial phases, like before I even wrote the book, it was sensitive and selective because I felt like, that was more descriptive of ADHD. Women with ADHD tend to be sensitive and their attention is much more selective. But then, after a couple iterations, we were like, I don't think this is going to be so intuitive for people. So we're going to have to pick something, I think that's a little bit more obvious. So I ended up choosing Allow Me to Interrupt because I think there's a slight, like, sarcastic tone to my writing and just like my personality. And
100%.
yeah, so
And I
it's
love
like
it.
polite, but not.
Yeah.
So I like it. There's a little bit of bite to it. And then it plays around with, the interruption. I know some people have looked at it and they were just like, isn't that kind of a stereotype because it's ADHD? And then it's like, but it's kind of a stereotype for a reason because that's one of the criteria, like one of
Hmm.
the criteria that you interrupt. But also it has this dual meaning of like, yes, people with ADHD can be impulsive and they tend to interrupt. And that's something they actually really struggle with. But interrupting could also really be a good thing. And I think that, females with ADHD tend to be misunderstood and mislabeled. And so that's why there's kind of like this theme of, I don't know if you noticed, but every chapter is written like the Shakespeare, uh,
Hmm.
if I be waspish, best beware my sting.
And I have to be honest, Shakespeare and me are not friends. So I was like, girl, ooh, right? But I definitely noticed the pattern. And I think also for me too, when you're talking about it has a little sting. For me, when I read that title, it was not just the girl I was growing up, not knowing who I was, because I was also late diagnosed, but then it was also, yeah, no, let me interrupt. Like it felt empowered. It was like a double
Exactly.
vibe title. And so kudos to you. I think that title really hit the nail on the head, at least for me. And, I think that goes into like the late diagnosis. I definitely want to concentrate on some more parts of your book, but I am curious, can you tell us your story a little bit? Were you late diagnosed? How is it for you? Because I feel there was a lot of moments of self-reflection in your book and how it was coming through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I was late diagnosed officially, but I basically, when I say diagnosed, I mean, because I'm a psychologist, and I specialize in this. So it was basically me going to a psychiatrist and being like, here are my symptoms, and here's why I think I have ADHD, and I would
Hmm.
like treatment.
Yep.
That's what it meant for me. But yeah, it was basically a matter of me just, going in and asking for help. I actually just wrote a blog post for Psychology Today about stimulant medication. And so you get a little bit of a sense, at least in the beginning, of, where I was at when I finally went and
Yeah.
asked help
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
about, medication for my ADHD. I think, what I've seen also like with my clients with ADHD is that we tend to put off our own like medical care because we get so wrapped up in other things. And so I don't think it was only the stigma, it was mainly the stigma, where I kind of was just like, well, I don't, I think I have this, and do I really want to know? And then once I know, should I share with other people? And it all kind of like got to a point where I was just like, this is enough.
Mm,
I know this is something I struggle with. I know that this is the way to treat it, with medication.
mm.
It's kind of, the most effective way to treat ADHD for most people. And so I just went in, to a psychiatrist and, asked to try medication. But yeah, in terms of like my symptoms growing up and how early did I know, I would say at least, definitely at least when I was like 18, 19, after I took my AP
Yeah.
psychology class and I learned
Start
about,
clicking.
yeah, yeah. And it was more like, I know something is off, here are my symptoms, but then they didn't really fit within like the ADHD criteria. So it's something I kind of like noticed and thought, I think I kind of struggle with this, but the way that it's understood, it just didn't really click,
And
like
I
you.
think, and I think that what you just said speaks volume to the question then of why are we seeing so many more women late diagnosed? And I know from your work and also reading your book, there is that critical piece of like the boy centric stigmaed behaviors bouncing off the walls. I know I see it with my clients because I also work with clients too. And I feel like our story is the story of so many women I work with. So I am curious, what are your thoughts on what needs to change when we're talking about a diagnosis? Because, like, when we do this whole reflect back of being late diagnosed and all of the times that that diagnosis could have helped us, there's a lot of shame. And I know you talk about that as well. But what do you think really needs to change for us to be more validated and for us to feel more empowered and people being more conscious for us as children, as girls? I hope that made sense.
Yes. I think, and I think this is kind of like the main message I guess I'm trying to relay, in my book and then in most of my writing. Whenever I write about ADHD in girls and women, I send the message that I think a lot of professionals wouldn't be very happy with because it would require a lot of work. But I think that we started with criteria that were developed very early on in the DSM-2 with hyperkinetic reaction of childhood because we see the label ADD, attention deficit disorder, first appear in the DSM-3. Now we are on the DSM-5 TR. I believe hyperkinetic reaction of childhood was 1968. That was the DSM-2. And I went and I purchased, oh, I have the DSM-3. So I have the DSM-3, the DSM-4. I was like, I've heard professionals like experts talking about how the
Yeah.
criteria have not changed so much over time. And I was like, I want to see it. So I
Get
ordered.
the proof.
Yeah, and they really have not changed a whole lot over time. It would take a lot of work, to develop new criteria, because they would have to be, generalizable. There's all these questionnaires that are based off of these criteria. And
Yeah.
so, but I guess like what I'm saying is that because we're dealing with criteria that are flawed because they were originally developed on and for, samples of mostly little white boys.
Yeah.
Like you can't really draw conclusions about girls and women from that,
Hmm.
especially, and you looked at like, the research, like the biology is different.
Yeah.
And socialization even is different.
Hmm.
So I really think, it's kind of like we need to start from scratch. I think the book Understanding Girls with ADHD is amazing. I think the most recent version of that was published in 2015, and it's still very relevant today because there hasn't been a whole lot of change, until
Yeah.
recently, just recently now, ADHD in women is getting a lot more attention. But one of the messages that the authors of Understanding Girls with ADHD, what they explain is that it makes more sense instead of comparing like girls to boys or men to women, it would make more sense to compare girls with ADHD to girls without ADHD.
Mm.
Right?
Hmm.
Because there are such big differences, between boys and girls. So the analogy that they use, or one of the authors of that book uses, is that, comparing boys and girls with ADHD is like comparing, apples and oranges.
Yeah. And I would assume from what you're saying, there are so many variables to support that. Specifically, I always get drawn more to that social piece of how boys versus girls, when we're talking about those gender roles, are treated and how that kind of intertwines. But like as a psychologist and writing this book, I'm just curious, like, were you frustrated through this process because of the lack of attention and spotlight? I mean, yeah, we're doing better. We are. I'm happy. I don't want to discredit that at all. But like, I don't know. Was this a hard thing for you in terms of that frustration piece as you were writing this book?
I feel like, with writing about like ADHD in girls and women, because I've done it a lot, I'm kind of desensitized. I think, it's a problem. And I think, in addition to like putting out this book, and
Hmm.
having hopefully making it accessible, people understand it.
Yeah.
They don't get bored and just put it down because it's not too academic. And then maybe, it's personal. People could relate to it. It's got this kind of like storytelling element to it.
Yeah.
Then hopefully, then that creates more of a buzz, and then that will lead to changes. But I think, there really needs to be criteria, specifically developed on females, especially with ADHD.
Yeah, and I think also, but you were talking about it, it does. It takes work, but it also takes money. And I know a lot of people that I've been able to talk to, like the funding for a lot of research is hard to come by. And I really enjoyed though how you just outlined, and maybe this is just the nerdy side of me, that I think it was the person you were referencing of the book, where it's like instead of comparing girls to boys, maybe we should be comparing more girls with versus girls without ADHD. And I resonate with that because when I was doing my research, I noticed that too. It was like individuals with versus individuals without. However, they weren't centering just women. It was just like kind of like generalizably of just people with versus people without. And that lack of spotlight to it. And I think all of that in my mind is going rampant now. It kind of ties into the stigma associated with our experiences growing up. And I know, like, for in your book, at least in the beginning of the book, you use the words like too much, being a hard ass, or all of these like words that get placed on us. I'm curious, what do you believe those labels, those interactions really create in terms of an understanding of who you are and your diagnosis beforehand, like who you are? Because I feel for me in my journey, when I got my diagnosis and I got really into understanding ADHD, it was like a real struggle to find who I was again because of all the messages I was receiving for how I was presenting. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know if you relate to that, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. It's confusing, especially when you get diagnosed as an adult. There are moments where I can't remember what it was recently, but there are these little spurts. Sometimes I'll just be doing something and then something I'm looking at or a song I'm listening to reminds me of something else and it pulls me back to this memory and then something clicks differently,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh my God, like that was ADHD. And,
Yeah.
but then I had internalized it so differently. We create these narratives, based on the information that's available to us because that's how brains work. And we
Yeah.
create schema. And, we continue living our lives until there's a like maybe a better or more accurate representation. And then you kind of need to go back and change your way of thinking so it's more accurate or validating or compassionate. But yeah, I mean the words that I start the book with in the introduction, those are not my words. Those are words literally that I pulled from
Yeah.
other women's descriptions of what they've been called.
But they're so common because I related to them as I was reading them. And I know my clients have also had moments of expressing those. And that's why, like, it is
Yeah.
very common for those words to be assigned to a lot of us from a young age. And, you know, I also hear in your writing and even how we're talking about it right now, it then just isn't just about the diagnosis that starts to allow the click. It's also the unlearning of all those messages that we received. And what does it mean to be now a woman with your diagnosis? How does that hold value to how you feel comfortable in presenting yourself? And I feel like that in itself can be so overwhelming, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, people, they focus so much on what makes a person, and the other thing is, sorry, I say what makes a person because I think, and this is what makes me angry when I think about this, because people attach it to personalities, like they'll say like this is a difficult person or she's just rude, right? Like, and that's very like black and white, like global,
Mm-hmm.
she's rude 24/7 and there's nothing wrong with the way that you're seeing the situation. Like maybe you're seeing it in a skewed way. Like maybe you're the problem. I'm just
Yeah.
saying like it's so easy to point your finger at someone and to say, like she's the problem.
Mm. And
And
I
I
wonder, it's interesting you say that because the first thing that comes to my mind is then how we end up then also pointing the finger at ourselves because of that. Like we are the problem. Like
yes,
I don't know, that hit something for me in that moment. Like, it's just, and I hear it with my clients. And I think then that also goes into what you talk a lot about in your book, about rejection sensitivity. And I know we're kind of still grappling on better understanding it. Is it really a trait of ADHD, etc.? I would love you to talk more about what you think I don't know, maybe this is the right word, damage or concern is about leaving that piece out of the conversation for many of us ADHDers.
leaving.
The concept of like the emotional dysregulation piece that we have, but also then how like it can be tied to this concept of rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And I know not everyone experiences it, but like,
Right.
do you feel it's causing damage to
Yes.
people that are that's where I was going.
Yes. And I think what's causing more damage is the fact that most people don't know what it is. I just gave a talk at my, graduate program where I graduated from with my PhD. And I went back and I gave a talk to some students. And
Mm-hmm.
I asked them in the beginning who has heard of rejection sensitivity dysphoria or RSD. And one person raised her hand. And she said there was a reason for it. I think it's because she had someone else went to another talk or heard someone else talking about it. It wasn't like it was taught to her in the program. And it's an amazing program, don't get me wrong. I love
Mm-hmm.
my graduate program, but they're not the only ones. I would say the
Yeah.
majority of grad programs don't really teach what what RSD is. By the same token, though, I mean, Dr. William Dodson has been writing about RSD now for, it's been about 10 years, but it takes time, for concepts to catch on. The other thing is, only recently, within the past 5 years, research has been conducted on RSD. I know it's hard to get funding, like you said, to study certain subjects because, people will, I think, at least this is my feeling, but I feel like scientists often push the idea of like, well, a clinician came up with this because Dr. Dodson is a psychiatrist. He was a practicing
Mhm.
psychiatrist. Now he's doing his own research on RSD, but I think there's something about when you're in academia, it's like leave it to the scientists to collect the data and, and
Yeah.
tell you what it is and isn't
But that
accurate.
clinical piece then ends up missing. And so it's
Yes,
like you can do so much, but you're then restricted
exactly.
because you're
Yeah,
not seeing
yeah,
the
exactly.
full scope.
Yes, and I think people underestimate the role of, like message boards and, they'll say like misinformation is spread. Okay, that's true, right? Misinformation could spread like wildfire, right? Via the
Hmm.
internet. The other thing that could happen is that someone could point something out that they observed clinically, which is what happened with RSD. And then that spread like wildfire because people were like, "Oh my God, there's a name for this. I struggle with this."
Hmm.
Um, and then, they'll call it like I don't know, like misinformation because it's not technically,
Empirically driven.
research.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
then it's like um you feel stuck because
Hmm.
a lot of people are endorsing this thing that probably exists, but it's not legitimate because it's not studied, but it's not studied because there's no funding.
Yeah. And it's a full circle. And it's interesting you say this too, because I also, okay, so first, wait, go back. Can you, for our listeners, just briefly discuss what we know RSD to be currently, like where we're at, what you know, if we can just start there for a second.
Yeah, so rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Sometimes it's called rejection sensitive dysphoria, I think because it's a new um like it's a new concept, like it's a new name,
It's
right?
like
So
trending, trying to be more neuroaffirming, more like kinder with the words.
I don't know. I mean, like sometimes you'll see in my book too, when I talk about like different forms of behavioral addiction, because they're not technically in the DSM, they're
Mhm.
not recognized. People call shopping addiction different things. They don't call
Yeah.
it shopping.
Okay.
They call it
Fair.
compulsive shopping buying disorder, compulsive buying disorder. There's like a million different names to describe the same thing because there's no agreement because it's not really like solidified somewhere. You know what I
Fair.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Construct, that was
Yeah.
the word.
We got there full circle.
Yeah. Yeah, like for example, we know now autism is autism spectrum disorder, but once there was Asperger's and language changes.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was rejection sensitive dysphoria. Now it's moving into rejection sensitivity dysphoria, but you might find it under either name.
Hmm.
Um, and it basically refers to what Dr. William Dodson, who's a psychiatrist, what he described as extreme sensitivity to perceived or actual criticism or rejection by others. So, perceived or actual means that either the person is actually rejected. Like you ask someone, like, "Hey, do you want to hang out this weekend?" And they say no. That is clear rejection,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Or it could be like, no, but maybe they're not actually being rejected because they're about to finish the sentence or they didn't get the chance to finish the sentence and they were going to say, I can't this weekend, but how about next?
Hmm.
And so it could be either one. It could
Okay.
be for real or it could be like imagined.
Hmm.
And in terms of like measuring it, there's an RSD checklist that's available on the Attitude Magazine website. And it's available on Attitude Magazine because Dr. Dodson writes and contributes a lot to Attitude
Awesome.
Magazine.
Okay.
So if you'd like to learn more about RSD, you could listen to some of his lectures. If you
Okay.
just go to YouTube and type in, rejection sensitive dysphoria and William Dodson, you'll find some of his talks where he describes what he's experienced with his patients. And then he's also conducting research right now where he's collecting data from people about their experiences of RSD. So the checklist that's available on the Attitude Magazine website, it's not carefully studied, and you may not find it, on
Mm-hmm.
Google Scholar right now because this is all new. So whatever is available in terms of what you'll find on Google Scholar is more like interviews where people are asking college students or writing up case examples of
Okay.
patients and just what they've told them. It's qualitative. It's gathering information in an interview fashion.
Fair. So now basically what you're saying is that RSD, because it's not in the DSM-5, it's been something that has been well discussed in outside of the research, and Dr. Dotson has done wonderful work to bring more information forward. I know Dr. Russell Barkley also has talked a little bit about this and how like there is that reinforcement of seeing these things experienced, but he also talks more about like, well, that makes sense because when we look at the deficits associated with impulsivity, regulation of our emotions, etc., and then you talk about what are the experiences we had growing up within the concept of rejection, it makes sense, right? And so I think that goes back into your book here, full circle. Is was this one of those the stories that you kept seeing in the women's voices that you gather? Because I know in the beginning of the book we taught you bring up a lot of this real stories from women. Where one of these patterns, one of those patterns you saw, is like rejection piece and how a woman feels within herself and how she's managing.
Yeah. So I don't know. I could be wrong, but from what I've followed Dr. Russell Barkley and like his talks and everything, I love watching his videos. He's very
Dad
sweet.
joke.
Yeah, the dad jokes, I love
He's
them.
like the dad.
It makes me happy. Yeah, when I listen on the weekend or whatever. And he knows it too. Like it's fun. But anyway, I don't think I've ever heard of him, like him actually talking about RSD,
Huh.
but he does talk a lot about emotion regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think he probably maybe doesn't talk about it because it's not very well researched, but emotion regulation, emotional dysregulation, as part of ADHD is very well
Yep.
researched. So there's just like a lot of information and certainty about it.
Mm-hmm.
And still it's not included as like a core symptom
I
of
know. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so, but it is interesting though, because so in the DSM-5, it's a little bit less obvious. But I want to see if maybe I can pull this up because in the talk that I gave, I literally like typed up what it said in the DSM-5 TR, like for whoever is interested, because I thought it was pretty interesting. But there is like a section in the DSM-5 TR where they discuss emotional dysregulation. It's under like additional associated features. I found it. Okay.
Okay.
So here's what it says. Under a little, it's like, you've got your criteria, and then there's like more information, including
Mm-hmm.
some statistics and gender differences and blah, blah, blah. And then there's like a little tiny paragraph that says associated features. And then it says, emotional dysregulation or emotional impulsivity commonly occurs in children and adults with ADHD. Individuals with ADHD self-report and are described by others as being quick to anger, easily frustrated, and overreactive emotionally, right? So this is not controversial. Like
Mm-hmm.
we emotional dysregulation is a significant problem for people with ADHD. And now the question is, should it be front and center? Like, should it be part of like the main, you know,
Mm.
ADHD symptoms instead of only focusing on inattention, right? Or like difficulties with sustaining attention, on difficult or, tasks that are very interesting or, motivational issues actually
Yeah.
that is tied to emotional dysregulation. Um, forgetfulness, difficulties with organization. Like ADHD is not just that. And so this is something that Dr. Russell Barkley, has written about and advocated for
Mm-hmm.
years. He even says that, when for at least the DSM-5, he says that like he was, trying to persuade or to he was advocating for emotional dysregulation to be included like in the actual criteria because if it's not, people just don't realize that it's
Yeah.
related and putting it under associated features is just not enough.
And I wonder if going back to the main question here about like the stories that you noticed or the patterns in the stories of other women, because I think to myself, yes, I do believe that it also needs to be included, whether it be up at the top or just as a whole. Because when you look at any of those experiences, if we are struggling with our emotion regulation, we're going to react. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen this where people's reactions are then labeled as other things that may not be anything involved with anxiety, irritability, and all those things that are attached to those diagnoses, but at the core, ADHD.
Yes.
Did I make sense with that?
Yes.
And so I wonder what were those patterns that you were seeing with the stories? Because I'm curious if it's related to that and anything else you noticed, because I would love to know.
Yeah, so I actually have my book here, and the way the introduction is organized because I really wanted that one to be to resonate with people, to help them feel,
Yeah.
validated and
Well, you did a good job, by the way, because I
yes.
felt very relatable.
But then I also want to break it down. There's the writer side of me where I don't know, I like the art of writing, but then also there's the science background. So I wanted to break it down and include what are the patterns. So I did that. So if
Mhm.
you kind of get past the stories, you see at the end these 12 women's experiences with emotional dysregulation, RSD.
Mhm.
Um, and I break it down into categories. So there's kind of like the overall, for example, feeling misunderstood, feeling ashamed after over responding, right? I mean, it is over responding. Objectively, it is. But
Mhm.
then also, I think that society maybe can be,
Assholes about it.
yes, thank
There you go.
you.
I'll say it. You don't have to say it. I'll be the one to say it.
Thank you. Over responding to intense emotions, being triggered when a relationship seems like it isn't reciprocal or equal, turning to people pleasing and perfectionism. I mean, all those things are kind of built into RSD. Like if you look at the checklist on the Attitude Magazine website, I actually did it recently with a client because when I'm trying to educate about what RSD is to help people, recognize it better, I'll fill
Mhm.
out the checklist with them and because it really does feel like it feels very accurate. Um, so what has been really hard for these women, the sense of being misunderstood, again, judged by others, having a history of actually being bullied and frequently criticized by others. And this is stuff you see in the research too. So they're not anomalies. Like this is very representative, of people with ADHD, but here we're highlighting the emotional dysregulation and the relevance of that. And then within the emotional dysregulation, the umbrella of that, there's RSD. So I think
Mhm.
RSD, I mean, it could be, yeah. I mean, I think it could be part of the ADHD criteria, but I wouldn't say it should be like people get confused. They say, how do you get diagnosed with RSD? I don't think it should be a diagnosis. I think,
Yeah.
it's considered like a syndrome or a cluster of symptoms, and then where does the cluster tend to fall?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think that also, when we were talking about the rejection sensitivity piece, my mind goes to, okay, masking. Like that's the first thing I think of inside my head. And the reason I say that is because I know looking back at my childhood and all these different experiences, there was several masking moments, but it was to protect myself. So I didn't have to face in those moments at least a lot of the dysregulation I would then be experiencing on my own. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the effects of masking and that internalized shame that we do experience growing up and like for people who are listening, whether they are women with ADHD or, clinicians or educators or whomever, right? How can they better support, identify, help women and even girls if they're working with younger populations around this? Because I feel like the masking piece and the internalized shame, again, not a symptom of ADHD, but it definitely is an outcome of a lot of us ADHD women.
Yes. Yeah. You know, I think women tend to be good actors because there are a lot of things that are just not okay for women to do, but at the same time the female brain is the social brain, and so we prioritize relationships, and that's why feeling accepted and avoiding rejection tends to
Mm-hmm.
be really important to females.
Yep.
And so I think, between like autism and ADHD, I think for like both autistic and ADHD women, um, tend to mask. At least like that's how I feel personally. And then from what I've seen with the
Yeah.
clients I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
But with ADHD, it's I think more challenging to sustain because of the emotional dysregulation, the executive functioning, right? And the impulsivity piece. Because
Mm-hmm.
there are moments where we screw up. Like we try to keep this mask on, but we're not. I really don't think like if it was just autism, for example, I think and their low support from what I've seen with my clients, like once you teach them the skills, like they can go out and mask.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the impulsivity that's the
Yeah.
part of ADHD that leads to the slip ups, right? The
Mm-hmm.
slip ups, because it's like, like maybe we have the knowledge, but then it's a performance challenge, right? It's not a knowledge problem, it's a performance challenge. So,
Mm-hmm.
we try really, really hard, but I feel like if anything, it's like it's even more
Yeah.
stressful and intense when you're someone with ADHD because you're more likely to screw up and let
Mm.
it fall.
Now, I'm just curious though, right? Because you're bringing up really great points. When we talk about that impulsivity piece and then that bringing it back to this internalization, do you and have you noticed with the work and writing this book, do you notice a lot more women with ADHD being impulsive in terms of how they are internalizing those feelings in terms of dysregulation inward versus outward? Is there a difference when we're seeing, women without ADHD versus women with ADHD, or even just boys in general with versus girls with? Are we internalizing more? And how does that show up when we say the word internalization, even?
When you say like, are we internalizing more, you mean like, do they struggle more with like anxiety and
The
depression?
dysregulation piece, yeah. So going back to like what I was talking about in terms of masking, I know for me, I had my moments of blow up for sure, looking backwards. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I struggled maintaining friends because everyone thought I was like batshit crazy. I mean, fair, not knowing what was going on. But I do also know that there was more times that I think the dysregulation came back inwards where I felt a lot of it on my am I explaining this right? Like I'm trying to like explain my experience to make sense of it, but when I hear masking and that emotion dysregulation, impulsivity, I just feel like I resonated more still impulsively still beating myself up internally. And what did that look like? And I think that is the anxiety piece,
And the
right?
RSD,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you're ruminating and right, kind of like
Yeah.
mulling over how you messed up, even if you didn't. But yeah, or like it's the immediate, like the automatic thinking. Like for example, when I know I've experienced this, but like, most recent examples that come to mind are like graduate school when like a professor was like, oh my God. So this was like, can't remember if this was the same time. There was one professor like where we just didn't mesh. It happens. And there was she thought I like didn't like her and I didn't not like her, but then because she thought I didn't like her, she wasn't very friendly to me, and then that made me actually not like her. Um, but like she thought I rolled my eyes at her, but I didn't. Like not on purpose. I didn't even remember doing that. So she basically came up to me, I think it was after class. She said, "Can you talk to me? Come by my office, like to talk to me." And so of course this like it's like this physiological,
My heart would have sunk.
fear. And and I can't, it's almost like I can't stay in the classroom because it's so overwhelming. So I go to the bathroom. I feel like a lot of women with ADHD could probably relate to
Yeah.
this. The
Hmm.
bathroom is your safe haven because
It's your
then
therapy room.
yes, lock yourself in a stall, right? And then you kind of go through your head like it's okay, whatever it is, you're gonna handle it. It'll
Or
be
you cry like I used to do a lot just to get it all out. Hmm.
when I was younger. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Keep going. Sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's like, it's that immediate thought. Like if someone says, "Hey, I need to talk," where it's like in the beginning, maybe it was more hit or miss. Like this could be a good thing. Oh my God, I'm so excited. And then it starts to become more and more like this is going to be bad. Because you start to look at the evidence and the evidence, I mean, people say like it's unrealistic thinking, but in the case of ADHD, it's not. Like we're not idiots. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people do think about like the evidence and they think about it accurately. A lot of times when I'm in this scenario, I get in trouble or I get negative feedback
Yep.
and it hurts. And you
Hmm.
feel it over and over and over and over again, and then you start to become hard on yourself.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main reasons is that you don't know the reason, like, and so you think it's because of me, right? I don't know what's wrong with me. There's something wrong with me.
And I think that just spoke volume to the anchor to a lot of the distress not having a diagnosis so young, because all you then do is internalize to try to make sense of what's going on, even if maybe you're not consciously doing it. And it's me. I'm broken. I fucked up. I did this wrong. It's all me. And you're right. You're not just talking about like in that moment and this idea of being logical. Well, again, you just described it. Your memory is saying logically, like, you're going to get yelled at, or you're going to be told that you were wrong, or you're going to get some form of feedback that isn't acknowledging you, but rather more so what you did wrong and how you should do it better next time, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Truth. Yeah. 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 And you're thinking of something. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just had a thought. It's okay. Keep talking. I'll tell you when I thought about it.
All right, my ADHD now is trying to think of what I was saying because I got distracted by your thought. Oh, I love this. I love the normalcy with this though.
Yes, I think that's what I was thinking, like the normalcy of it. Oh, yeah. So the whole thing where people say like, "Oh, well, if you say like it's because of my ADHD or because I'm autistic, like you're like it's enabling, right? You're an enabler or whatever people like to say." And I strongly disagree with that. I think um, it would have been nice, honestly, to like in those situations when they're just like when superiors especially when they
Hmm.
talk to you and they say like something like well, I don't understand like oh, why can't you do this right, that kind of a question, like why can't you just get this or why can't you just do this right, to just like respond because I have a neurodevelopmental disorder. Like throw that back at them.
Hmm.
I'm neurodivergent because I have ADHD, and then that would shut down the conversation completely. Like,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. And I think also as you were talking about this, it clicked for me, I think, where my emotional I was resonating with your book on a deeper emotional sense. And I think I now figured out why I resonated with your title so much, because it's not just allow me to interrupt myself, allow me to interrupt because that's an ADHD thing or the empowerment. I think for me specifically, it was more of let me interrupt the narrative and the expectations and the
Yes.
repetition of all of the blame and
Yes.
self internalization and lost time without my damn diagnosis.
Yeah.
And I think that's for me. I don't know when other people read your book if they're going to resonate with that, but I really resonate with that. And I I think I just put the words to it. And so I'm gonna just now lean into this. When you were writing this book, like what do you want your readers, specifically the women who are picking up this book, who have never felt like they could fit the typical ADHD mold or lost times, etc. What do you want women to take away from this book? Like, what's the message you're really trying to drive home here?
Um, oh my God, one message is hard, but I think, the main message, and the thing is also like as you were talking about the title and you were like, this is how I see it. I think there's beauty to putting something out there and like there's my intention, but then I
Mm-hmm.
think there's also something beautiful about just letting it simmer and allowing people to just, derive whatever messages or see what they
Yeah.
see. I was talking to an author recently who writes fiction, and she's thinking about, turning her book into a movie. And so I was like, if it does happen, like, would you want to be involved? In the movie making. Or for example, like, my book is going to be turned into an audiobook. So one thing we talked about was, am I going to be the one reading or narrating, or would I hire someone? And should it be someone else reading the book? And so she said to me something that was really interesting. She's like, there's something really cool about just throwing your work out there and letting someone, you know, reflect, their perspective. Or, hearing someone else read it, she's like, it's cool
Yeah.
how someone else reads it, or
Mm-hmm.
to allow someone else to interpret the book and use that to make a movie and not be involved in that. And
Mm.
so a piece of me, sees it that way too,
Yeah.
where, I hope that people walk away, with whatever message means, the most to them. But in terms of like what I hope they can walk away with, like more globally, it's, feeling empowered and educated because I really do put a lot of work into, especially in chapter 4, where it's more of the scientific
Mm-hmm.
chapter where I write about the brain and the body and neurotransmitters, and menopause, hormones. Um, I want them to feel like educated,
Yeah. The
so
informed piece.
informed, yes, but not make it, like they feel like they have to slug through
Mm-hmm.
to get to the
Fair.
information.
Fair. Yeah, no, and I really like that though. It's kind of like, again, I'm doing exactly what you just said you think is cool. I'm taking what you're saying and I'm interpreting it in the way I guess that really resonates with me, which is a beautiful thing. But I think what I'm also hearing is that one of the biggest goals or takeaways is you wanted to create a book that others are going to pick up, read, get something from, but not just get something from, but creates a stage for them to resonate in a way that may just be unique to them and allow for then that empowerment moving forward, whatever that may look like. And I agree with you. And I've never heard someone say that before. And I think that's really cool, actually. And I like it. So kudos to whoever that is. Yay. But I think that's great because you are right. It was a perfect example of how I just did that with your title, where that may not have been your intent or where you were coming from, but your intent still landed. But then it also gave me space to land with my own.
Because you're
And
your
that,
own person.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. And that is a beautiful thing. And it's almost like we're all becoming connected, even though we don't know each other, right? Like it's
Yes.
pretty
I
cool.
love that.
Yeah. That is
Yeah.
awesome. And so I then wondered to myself, because obviously this wasn't just a book you were writing for others, you were, I'm going to make an assumption, also writing for yourself. But like, if you could go back to that younger self, the one that didn't have the diagnosis, right? What would you say to her now if you could get into a room with her?
Um,
I know that's like a deeper question, but I want to put the light on you.
what would I say to her? I'm just thinking about it. I feel like it would be a little bit, definitely with some pizzazz. I don't know. I guess I would say to her, like, stick to your guns, like, they're gonna be people who try to stop you, or, and I think it's from a place of not understanding. There are going to be a lot of
Mm.
people who come from a place of not understanding you. It's like my mentor, who, by the way, I'm still in touch with, and we have a very good relationship. But like in my book, he said to me during one of my reviews at the end of the year, and maybe it was in the middle at the end, we would sit and he would give like a review uh,
Hmm.
to students. And so mine was like, it was something like, Gilly, you're gonna go really far. And basically said like, you're really smart, you're brilliant. I think you're gonna bring introduce a lot to the world. He's like, but I want you to know you're gonna piss a lot of people off in the process.
Make those waves, baby.
Yeah, that's the allow me to interrupt, right? Like
I love it.
he was like, you're
Full
gonna piss
circle.
a lot of people off. And he was like, because there are gonna be people who think they're more important to you than you, or who like put themselves up on a pedestal,
Mm.
and they're gonna see you as challenging them, and they're not gonna like that. And so, the message he was trying to give me was like, it's a balance. And I think I've been trying, really, really trying, to implement that, because I think it's good advice that I would
Hmm.
give other people too. I think it is a balance. It's a balance of, sticking to your guns and, kind of following your gut feelings and the things that you're really good at, the things you're
Mm.
really passionate about, don't give up. If
Yeah.
something matters a lot to you, don't let other people get in the way of that. If you really care about something and you have this goal, then you keep trying. And that's what
Yeah.
grit is, right?
Yeah.
Passion and perseverance. And then there are going to be people who, have egos, who may try to interfere with that. There are also going to be people who I think are going to be very supportive, and you're going to want to hang on to those
Hmm.
connections because it's hard. It's really hard, I think, to
Yeah.
find them. So you don't let those go. You stay in touch.
Yeah.
But then, in terms of like the balance piece, is like you need to ask yourself, at certain points of your life, like, can I afford to let go of this connection? Because there are moments like, for example, if you need to get your PhD, this didn't happen with me, but like, let's say you're graduating, right? You're getting a
Hmm.
doctorate, like, wow, but you really don't get along with the supervisor or something like that. Like,
Hmm.
you have to ask yourself, like, is this the time to like cut ties? Maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Those are moments in which it's about practicing emotion regulation strategies and eye on the prize. And then once you're done, then you can start to be a little bit more flexible in terms of, paving your path and, molding your environment. And so it really is kind of context dependent. But yeah, I feel like that was a very long-winded way.
No, it was great. No, it was great. And I think also as whatever you want to call it, long-winded, I liked it. One of the things that I think would be missing, like you had just said, is that when you are informed and you know your shit,
Yes.
you hold a level of empowerment that doesn't allow the voices to beat you down as much. And I think that's just what has been missing from so many girls without their
Yes.
diagnosis. It's because it's taking away their access to be informed and instead become informed that they're the problem or that there's something wrong with them.
Right. And
And
to be the best, at
yeah,
what they do, or to feel the best, like
yeah,
I think when you're neurochemically, when you're imbalanced,
yeah,
and as a girl, naturally you're like that, with hormonal
yeah,
cycles. Um, it's just, and people don't even realize that there's a link between your menstrual cycle and your hormones and your ADHD
yeah,
symptoms. But when you're more aware, you're more compassionate, you know how to plan, and then how to adjust,
yeah,
medication and help
accordingly.
yourself, right?
Yeah,
Um, rather than feel like disadvantaged because you kind of are.
yeah, fair. Wow. Gilly, thank you so much. And before we end, first and foremost, everyone, you're going to have to get this woman's fucking book. She's amazing. Her book is amazing. It was empowering. I mean, I'm also in the realm of ADHD and I help, but I still got something from it. It was the recognition. So I do believe that your book is for anybody wherever they are on their journey with ADHD. And before I let you go, can you just let our listeners know where they can find you? Maybe also a little bit about when your book will be released. Obviously, I'll put all of your links in the description, but I would love to know where people can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me at my website, just drgillycon.com, or on social media. I would say I'm the most active on Instagram, also Dr. Gilly Kahn, no period.
Okay.
But yeah, you can find like my information through
Perfect.
my website. The other thing I will say too is like like most writers, but like as a scientist, I love getting feedback, like specific feedback,
Yeah.
not just this was amazing. I want to know which chapter did you like? Because then whatever feedback you give me, I'm going to use it. Like
Oh,
if
that's great to
a
know.
lot of
Yeah.
people benefit from chapter 4, I'm going to write more of that. If people are
Yeah.
really interested in trauma, because each chapter kind of focuses on a different
Hmm.
niche or subtopic. So I guess that's like my request, right? Enjoy the book and then be specific and please give me real feedback.
Awesome. And I know you had mentioned too that you're writing for Psychology Today. How do people find that? Is it in your bio or your link in your Instagram? Because I know some people also like
Yeah.
following people there too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. No, I don't even have my blog on my Instagram. But if you go to my website and then you look at publications, you'll see like the
Perfect.
link to my
Yeah.
blogs. You want to guess what my blog page is called?
What?
If I Be Waspish.
Isn't that what you put in the book too?
Yeah, that's
That
chapter
Shakespeare.
one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it. I love it though. It's a connection to everything. And I think that's really beautiful. And it's also fucking empowering. Like seriously. I am so happy that I came across you on social media. I am so happy to know you're another voice in our field advocating and holding shit down and not allowing anyone to not discredit you, discourage you, right? Like you're here to make waves. Like, yeah, you want to make the friends, but like you're here to make up for lost times. And I'm truly happy to know you and have our community have you. So thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And again, get her book. It's great. It's great. Thanks for hanging out with me on ADHD Realities. Hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend who gets it. And always remember, your brain isn't the enemy. Work with it and not against it. Until next time, everyone, be well.